Police officers arrested Chuck Norris's daughter right in front of her house, just because she was selling lemonade. When they started destroying her stand and mocking her, she cried, not knowing that within a minute her father would arrive. What Chuck Norris did next shocked everyone. Subscribe to the channel and comment below where in the world you're watching from. The Texas sun had a way of waking the world before it was ready. By the time the clock on the kitchen wall blinked 8:03, the light was already pouring through the wide windows of the Norris home, touching everything with its golden warmth. The air outside shimmered faintly, still carrying the promise of another hot afternoon. Birds fluttered along the fence line, their chirps cutting through the faint hum of cicadas that had been singing since dawn. Somewhere down the dirt road, a neighbor's old pickup groaned to life, its sound fading into the distance like an echo of habit. It was the kind of summer day that felt endless, open, and full of possibilities. Dana Norris stood barefoot on the wooden porch, her hair still messy from sleep, her hands clutching a piece of paper she'd spent half the night working on. Across the top, in bright yellow marker, she had written the words Fresh Lemonade 1 and surrounded them with tiny drawings of lemons wearing sunglasses. She had taken her time with the colors, using the neat block letters her mother had taught her years ago when she first started keeping a journal. The sign wasn't perfect, but that was part of its charm. Her smile widened as she looked at it, her very first business, her first step toward earning the money she needed for the camera she'd been dreaming of for months. The idea had come to her just 2 weeks earlier, when her father had found her flipping through a photography magazine at the breakfast table. "You really like those pictures, don't you?" Chuck had asked, smiling in that calm, patient way of his. "They're incredible," Dana had said. "I want to take pictures like that someday. Not with my phone, really take them. With a real camera." He had ruffled her hair and said, "Then maybe you should earn it, sweetheart. The things we work for mean more when we get them." She had taken those words to heart. Ever since, she had been planning, saving, sketching ideas in her notebook, and finally, today her dream was real. Her lemonade stand would stand proudly in front of the Norris property, just beyond the gate, where the passing cars slowed near the bend in the road. She had already squeezed the lemons that morning, careful not to waste a drop. The kitchen counter was sticky from sugar and pulp, and the air smelled faintly of citrus in summer. Her mother had helped her fill the glass pitcher with ice and a sprig of mint, nodding approvingly at her daughter's effort before heading to the barn to check on the horses. Dana worked quickly, wanting everything to be perfect before the sun climbed too high. She carried her supplies cups, a cooler, a jar for money, and her hand-painted sign out to the small patch of grass near the wooden fence. The stand itself was a simple structure that she and her mom had built together the day before. A small wooden table, a couple of planks nailed across to form a counter, and a strip of cloth for shade. Her father had passed by while they were painting it, pretending to inspect it like a building inspector, which made both of them laugh. He'd told her it looked strong enough to survive a hurricane. Now, as Dana arranged her setup, she felt that quiet kind of excitement that came from doing something that mattered. The road was still, save for the occasional whisper of wind through the dry grass. The air smelled of cut hay from a neighboring ranch. She placed the pitcher right in the center of the table, adjusted her sign so that it faced the road perfectly, then stepped back to admire her work. For a moment, she imagined herself not as a kid from a quiet corner of Texas, but as a young entrepreneur, ready to face the world. It wasn't just about lemonade. It was about being independent, about working towards something with her own hands. Her first customer came sooner than expected. A man jogging with his golden retriever slowed as he neared the stand. Sweat glistened on his forehead, and he smiled when he saw her sign. "Well, what do we have here?" he asked, catching his breath. "Ice-cold lemonade for $1, Dana said brightly. "Perfect for a hot day." The man laughed and reached into his pocket. "You've got yourself a deal, young lady. Make it 2 cups. She poured carefully, handing him one, while setting the other near the ground for the panting retriever, who lapped at it eagerly. "You thought of the dog, too? Smart kid," the man said, impressed. He handed her a $5 bill. "Keep the change, Dana." She blinked in surprise. "Thank you, sir." He waved as he jogged away, the dog trotting beside him, and she felt her heart swell with pride. By mid-morning, business was steady. A group of cyclists stopped for drinks. A couple walking hand in hand bought a cup each. And even Mrs. Kennedy from 2 houses down came by, using her walker, smiling warmly as she placed 2 crumpled dollar bills on the table. "You remind me of my granddaughter," she said. "Same sparkle in the eyes." Dana thanked her, handing her a chilled cup. "You stay cool out here, honey," the old woman said, shuffling back toward her porch. The compliments, the smiles, the clinking of coins in her jar, it all made Dana feel like she was doing something right, something good. Around noon, her mother came outside, wiping her hands on a towel. "Look at you, businesswoman," she said proudly. Dana grinned and showed her the jar. $17 already, she said, and Mrs. Patel said she'll stop by later with her kids. Her mother kissed her on the forehead. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart, but make sure you keep drinking water, okay? It's getting hot." "I will," Dana promised. Her mother smiled and turned back toward the house, calling over her shoulder, "And don't forget sunscreen." Dana laughed and reapplied a bit from the small bottle on the table, humming softly as she did. The rhythm of the day had settled into something peaceful, sunlight glinting off the glass pitcher, the hum of insects, the occasional murmur of passing cars. Every time someone stopped, she greeted them with the same bright energy, counting change with careful precision, just like her mother had taught her. She didn't notice the white SUV right away. It came from the far end of the road, rolling slowly, its dark-tinted windows reflecting the blinding sun. It wasn't until it pulled to a stop across from her stand that she glanced up. The vehicle had the emblem of the county sheriff's department printed on the side in fading gold letters. For a brief moment, her heart lifted. Maybe they were thirsty too. She straightened the sign and brushed a bit of dust from her table. 2 men sat inside talking. One of them looked at her, then at the stand, then leaned toward his partner. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but their expressions weren't friendly. They stayed parked for nearly half a minute, the engine idling, before slowly pulling away. Dana frowned slightly, watching the car until it disappeared around the curve. "Weird," she murmured, shrugging it off. Probably just checking the area, she thought. By early afternoon, the heat grew heavier. The shade from the oak tree behind her stretched longer across the grass. Sweat clung to her neck, but she didn't mind. Every time a car slowed, she straightened, ready with her practiced smile. Her earnings had nearly doubled. She could already imagine unboxing that camera, the weight of it in her hands, the click of the shutter capturing sunsets over the ranch, and the wild horses running across the hills. She was counting change for another customer when the white SUV returned. This time it didn't drive past. The gravel crunched under its tires as it pulled right up beside her little stand. Dana felt a prickle of unease crawl up her neck. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out. He wore mirrored sunglasses that reflected her small figure back at herself. His uniform was crisp, the badge polished. Another man got out on the passenger side, younger, nervous, his hand brushing against his belt as if out of habit. Donna smiled weakly, trying to keep her voice cheerful. "Hi there. Would you like some lemonade?" Neither man answered immediately. The older one took a slow step forward, his boots sinking slightly into the dry soil. "You the one selling this?" he asked. His tone wasn't curious. It was cold, almost accusatory. "Yes, sir," Dana said. "Just lemonade. $1 a cup." She pointed to the sign as if it explained everything. The man tilted his head. "You got a permit for that?" "A permit?" she repeated, confused. "I don't think I need one, sir. I'm just selling it in front of my house." He frowned, glancing at his partner, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. "You don't think you need one? Well, kid, that's not how it works. This here's commercial activity. You can't just start a business without permission." Dana's stomach nodded. "It's just lemonade, sir," she said softly. "I made it myself. My mom knows. It's just for the summer." The officer looked at the table again, his jaw tightening. "You can't be doing this without a vendor's license," he said. "And where's your food handling certification?" The younger officer shifted his weight uneasily. "Sarge, maybe." "Not maybe," the older one snapped. "Rules are rules. You don't get to pick which ones you follow." Dana felt her throat tighten. The world that had seemed so bright that morning suddenly felt small, harsh and unfamiliar. The air was still, but her pulse raced. She tried to keep her voice steady. "I can ask my mom to come?" The officer interrupted her with a dismissive wave. "Save it. You're in violation, kid. Pack this up before I have to write you up for operating without a permit." "I didn't know," Dana said, her voice cracking. "I just wanted to—" The man sighed as if she were a burden. "Ignorance doesn't make it legal." "Come on, son," he told his partner. "Let's get this handled." As the younger officer reluctantly approached the table, the older one reached down, picked up a bottle, and examined it like it was evidence. "Unlabeled," he muttered. "No data production, no storage compliance." "It's lemonade," Dana said helplessly. "Just lemonade." The younger officer looked at her, guilt flickering in his eyes. "Maybe we can just give her a warning." But his superior was already shaking his head. "No, if we start letting people ignore the law, this whole place turns into chaos." Dana's hands trembled as she reached for her pitcher, but the man's arm shot out, knocking it from the table. The glass hit the ground, shattering. Lemonade spilled across the dirt, soaking into the dry earth like spilled sunlight. Her heart stopped. "No!" she cried. "That was all I had!" The officer didn't flinch. "Step back," he ordered. "This is evidence." Tears welled in her eyes. She felt the heat of the day press down harder, suffocating. A few neighbors had come out onto their porches now, whispering among themselves. One woman started filming with her phone. The older officer straightened and looked around. "Everyone mind your own business," he barked. "This is police procedure." Dana's voice was barely audible when she said, "Please, sir, don't take my money." But he reached for the jar anyway, plucking it from the table. Coins clinked inside. "Confiscated," he said, "until we verify it's not part of an illegal sale." She felt something break inside her then, a helpless, sinking feeling she'd never known before. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. She wanted to scream, but her throat had gone dry. When she tried to reach for her phone to call her mother, the older officer stepped closer, towering over her. "Put that down," he said sharply. "Don't interfere." "I'm just calling my mom," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't make this worse for yourself," he warned. His tone was so cold that even the younger officer hesitated, glancing uncertainly between them. The man's voice rose again. "You're resisting a lawful order. Hands behind your back." The crowd gasped. "She's just a kid," someone shouted, but the officer ignored them. He pulled a pair of plastic ties from his belt, grabbed her wrist roughly, and bound them together. The pain stung. Her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. But the man wasn't listening. The world blurred as the tears fell. She could barely hear the murmurs around her, the sound of phones recording, the distant hum of the highway. The sun seemed hotter now, almost cruel in its brightness. And somewhere down the road, faint but growing louder, came the rumble of a familiar engine. The crowd began to turn toward the sound, murmuring quietly. Dana blinked through her tears, her heart pounding with confusion and hope. A cloud of dust rose behind a dark pickup truck speeding toward them. Her father was coming home. The dust cloud thickened on the horizon, blurring the road until it looked like the air itself was trembling. The distant hum of the engine grew louder, pulsing through the summer heat that clung to every surface. Dana stood motionless beside her overturned stand, her wrists bound in stiff plastic ties, her eyes red from crying. The lemonade had soaked into the dirt, leaving a dark stain that glistened faintly under the sun like a wound. The shards of glass from her pitcher caught the light, tiny reflections scattered across the ground like broken stars. The older officer, Sergeant Kelly, stood near her with his arms crossed, unmoved by her tears, while his younger partner shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Dana, the growing crowd of neighbors, and the sound of the approaching vehicle. The murmurs of the onlookers swelled, the tension in the air tightening with every passing second. A few people had come closer now, Mrs. Kennedy with her walker, the jogger from earlier, and a couple of neighbors holding up their phones, filming everything. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, making every breath feel heavier. The younger officer wiped sweat from his brow and muttered, "Sarge, maybe we should just let her go. She's a kid, for God's sake." Kelly shot him a hard look. You questioning me, Muir? He barked, his voice cutting through the thick air like a whip. You think because she's smiling and small that the law doesn't apply? He pointed a thick finger toward the girl. That's the problem. People think they can do whatever they want. Sell things, block roads, cause scenes. You let it slide once, and you've lost control of the streets. Muir hesitated. This isn't the streets, sir. It's her front yard. Kelly turned sharply toward him, his face flushing red. You think I don't see that? She's in public view. That's commercial activity. It's unauthorized, unregulated, and illegal. End of story. He turned back to Dana. You understand what happens when people think they're above the rules? They start breaking bigger ones. It starts small, selling lemonade, ignoring ordinances, and next thing you know, no one respects the badge. Dana didn't understand most of what he was saying. All she could feel was fear. Her small hands twitched behind her back, the plastic cutting into her skin. The crowd's voices blurred together into a low murmur, like waves in her ears. She wanted to call out for her mother, for her father, for anyone who could make it stop. Please, she said softly. Please, I didn't know. I didn't mean to break anything. Kelly crouched slightly, his sunglasses reflecting her face back at her, a trembling child with tears streaking through the dust on her cheeks. Didn't know, he repeated mockingly. That's what they all say. He straightened and turned to Muir. Bag what's left of that pitcher. Evidence of unauthorized sales. Muir stared at the shards on the ground. Sir, it's lemonade. Evidence, Kelly snapped. Or do I need to remind you what happens when an officer disobeys an order? Reluctantly, the younger man pulled out a small plastic bag, crouching down to pick up a piece of glass. The motion seemed absurdly slow, each clink of glass against the bag echoing in the silent air. Dana looked at him, her lips trembling. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Kelly grabbed the jar of coins again, shaking it once so the metal clinked against the glass. Unregistered income, he muttered as if reciting a list of crimes. This'll go into evidence too. That was the moment when Dana's small, quivering voice broke through the silence. That's my money, she said, her voice cracking. I earned that. It's mine. Kelly looked down at her like she said something absurd. You don't get to earn from illegal activity, little girl. She took a shaky breath. It's not illegal. It's lemonade. The sergeant sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. I don't have time for this nonsense. He nodded to Muir. Call it in. We'll process her, contact a guardian, and close it out. The younger officer hesitated again, glancing at the growing crowd. Sir, you really think we need to process her? She's 13. Kelly's head turned sharply. You questioning me again? Muir opened his mouth, then closed it, the words dying in his throat. No, sir. Kelly's jaw tightened. Good, then do your job. Dana's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. Her throat felt dry, her eyes burned. The edges of her vision blurred as the heat shimmered, and the smell of spilled lemonade mixed with dust made her stomach turn. She heard Mrs. Kennedy shouting from her porch, her voice quivering with anger. You should be ashamed of yourselves. She's just a child. Kelly ignored her. He crouched again, tightening the ties on Dana's wrists until she winced. Maybe this'll teach you to respect authority, he muttered. Stop! A voice from the crowd yelled, but the sergeant didn't even glance up. That's when the rumble of the approaching engine grew deafening. A black pickup truck turned sharply into the gravel path, its tires spitting dust and small stones. The vehicle rolled to a stop with a sharp screech, the door flung open before the engine had even fully quieted. The man who stepped out moved with the calm precision of someone who didn't need to rush to be in control. Chuck Norris walked toward them, his face unreadable under the shadow of his hat, his posture steady but radiating purpose. The heat shimmered around him, and for a moment, the whole scene seemed to hold its breath. Dana froze, her tears stopping mid-motion. Dad, she whispered. The sergeant turned toward the sound, frowning. Sir, this is a restricted... But his words trailed off as he recognized the man. The crowd had gone silent now, the only sound the faint buzz of insects and the distant hum of the truck's cooling engine. Chuck's eyes flicked over the scene once, taking in the shattered glass, the trampled sign, the trembling girl with her hands bound, and the two officers standing beside her. His jaw clenched, but his voice when it came was low and steady. Let her go. Kelly squared his shoulders, his voice rising defensively. Sir, step back. This is official police business. Chuck took one more step forward. You're standing on my property, he said quietly, and that's my daughter. The sergeant hesitated, caught off guard by the calm tone. Then you should have taught her the law, he snapped. She's been operating an illegal business here. We're shutting it down. Chuck's eyes didn't waver. Selling lemonade in front of her own home? His voice was still quiet, but something in it carried a weight that made even Muir glance away. That's what you call illegal now? Kelly lifted his chin. There are rules, Mr. Norris. Health codes, permits. She broke them. Chuck took another step, and the younger officer instinctively moved back. The sergeant stood his ground, though his confidence faltered for a fraction of a second. Remove the ties, Chuck said. Sir, I'm warning you, Kelly began, reaching for his baton. Interfering with an active investigation. Remove them, Chuck said again, his voice quieter now, but sharper, cutting through the air like a blade. For a moment, no one moved. Then Kelly, irritated and flushed, took a step forward, gripping his baton tighter. That's enough. Step back now, or I'll... What happened next was so fast that most people watching only caught fragments. A movement, a blur, a shift in balance. The baton was in Kelly's hand one moment and clattering against the dirt the next. Chuck's hand moved like a flicker of wind, his grip finding the sergeant's wrist, twisting it just enough to force him down without breaking anything. Muir, startled, reached instinctively for his taser, but before he could unclip it, Chuck had already turned, his other hand gently pushing the younger man's arm aside. The taser dropped harmlessly to the ground. The whole thing took less than 5 seconds. When it was over, both officers were disarmed, standing in shock, their weapons scattered on the ground. Chuck hadn't raised his voice once. He looked at Muir first, his tone even. You ever put plastic ties on a child again? You make sure you know what you're protecting her from. Muir swallowed hard, his face pale. Yes, sir. Then Chuck turned to Kelly, who was still kneeling, rubbing his wrist. Untie her, he said simply. Kelly glared up at him. You can't just... Chuck leaned slightly closer, his voice low. Untie her. The sergeant hesitated for a second, then pulled a small knife from his belt and sliced through the plastic ties. Dana stumbled forward, her wrist free at last. She turned and threw her arms around her father, sobbing into his chest. Chuck wrapped one arm around her, steady and protective, keeping his eyes on the two officers. The crowd erupted in applause, spontaneous, raw, relieved. Some people shouted words of support, others simply clapped, the sound echoing across the open field. Kelly's face reddened with anger and humiliation, but even he seemed to understand that there was nothing he could do. Chuck's voice broke through the noise again, calm but firm. You've both forgotten what that badge means, he said quietly. It's not a weapon. It's a promise. The younger officer looked down, ashamed. Kelly muttered something under his breath and began collecting the scattered equipment. Dana clung to her father, still trembling. Dad, they broke everything. I know, sweetheart, he said softly. It's over now. He smoothed her hair, his voice gentle but steady. You're safe. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. They said I broke the law. Chuck met her eyes, his expression warm but serious. No, Dana, they broke it. You just reminded them what right looks like. The words hung in the air, solid and unshakable. Behind them, the crowd began to disperse, murmuring to one another, phones still recording as they walked away. Muir gave a small nod of apology before retreating to the SUV. Kelly lingered a moment longer, glaring, then finally followed. The car door slammed, the engine roared to life, and the vehicle rolled away, leaving behind the shattered stand, the crushed lemons, and the quiet aftermath of chaos. For a long time, neither Chuck nor Dana spoke. The only sound was the faint rustle of wind through the grass and the soft clink of coins still rolling in the dirt where the jar had been dropped. Donna's tears slowed, replaced by the steady rhythm of her breathing against her father's chest. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but certain. I was scared, Dad. He nodded. I know. They said I was doing something wrong. He looked down the road where the patrol car had disappeared, the horizon already swallowing the dust. When people forget what's right, they start seeing wrong everywhere, he said quietly. But don't let their blindness make you doubt yourself. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. The sun was beginning its slow descent, softening the edges of the world with its amber light. Chuck guided her toward the house, one arm still around her shoulders. Behind them, the remnants of her stand glowed faintly in the fading sunlight, broken but not destroyed. As they reached the porch, Dana looked back once more. "Dad," she said quietly, "will they come back?" Chuck paused, his hand resting on the wooden railing. "Maybe," he said honestly, "but next time they'll think twice." She hesitated, then asked, "Because of you?" He smiled faintly, looking down at her. "Because of us." And with that, they stepped inside, leaving the bruised quiet of the afternoon behind them. The world outside still shimmered under the weight of the sun, but inside the Norris home, there was calm, the kind that follows a storm when truth has spoken louder than fear. The evening came quietly, as if the world itself were holding its breath after the storm. The sky over the Norris ranch glowed in deep shades of orange and red, the kind of sunset that only Texas could make, vast, endless, and almost biblical in its beauty. The air smelled faintly of dust, cut grass, and the fading sweetness of spilled lemonade. The sun was sinking behind the line of oak trees, casting long shadows across the broken stand that still lay where it had fallen. A single paper cup rolled lazily in the warm breeze before settling against the curb, where it trembled and stopped. Inside the house, the silence was thick. Dana sat at the kitchen table, a cold washcloth pressed against her wrists. The plastic ties had left faint red marks, though the pain was more in her chest than her skin. Her mother, Gina, moved quietly around the kitchen, trying to find something to say, but every time she opened her mouth, the words died in her throat. Chuck stood by the window, watching the last light fade, his reflection faint in the glass. His shoulders were squared, but his eyes were distant, like a man who'd seen something that still burned in his mind. Neither he nor Gina had spoken much since the officers left. The shock had hung over them like the humid air outside. Dana finally broke the silence. "They said I was breaking the law," she murmured, her voice small, fragile. "All I did was sell lemonade. I didn't even do anything wrong." Gina turned, kneeling beside her. "Honey, you didn't do anything wrong," she said softly. "Sometimes people just forget how to be kind." Dana's eyes filled again, the memory flashing back with every blink. The officer's cold tone, the glass pitcher shattering, the sting of the plastic cutting into her skin. "They treated me like I was some kind of criminal," she said, her voice trembling. "Everyone was watching. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe." Chuck's reflection in the glass didn't move. He listened in silence, his hands tightening around the edge of the windowsill. The sound of his daughter's voice, the small tremor in it, cut deeper than any fight he'd ever been in. Gina reached up and touched Dana's cheek. "You're safe now," she whispered. "Your dad made sure of that." Dana looked up at him then, eyes wide and uncertain. "Dad, how did you know?" He finally turned. "I heard the crowd when I pulled up the road," he said quietly. "And then I saw you." She swallowed hard. "You looked angry." "I wasn't angry," he said, his voice even but heavy. "I was done watching people who should protect others turn into bullies." He walked over and crouched beside her, meeting her gaze. "You didn't deserve what happened out there, Dana. No one does." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. She reached for his hand and gripped it tightly. "They broke everything," she said softly. "My sign, my picture, even my jar with the money. I'll help you build it again," he said, "stronger this time." "But what if they come back?" "Then I'll be waiting," he said simply. Gina stood, crossing her arms. "Chuck, we can't just let this go." They humiliated her in front of the whole neighborhood, and the way that man grabbed her. "I know," he interrupted, standing slowly. His tone wasn't angry, just controlled, deliberate. "I know exactly what they did." Gina hesitated. "So what are you going to do?" He didn't answer right away. He turned toward the window again, watching the last of the sun disappear behind the trees. "First," he said, I'm going to make sure they never do it again to anyone. That night, the story began to spread. Someone from the crowd had uploaded the video. It started small, a few neighbors sharing it on local community pages, then local news picking it up under the headline, "Police detain 13-year-old girl for lemonade stand. Father intervenes." Within hours, it was everywhere. By morning, the clip had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. When Dana woke up the next day, her phone was buzzing with messages. Friends from school, strangers from other states, even reporters wanted to talk to her. She scrolled through the comments, her stomach twisting. Some people were outraged, calling the officers monsters and disgraces to the badge. Others accused Chuck of assaulting law enforcement. It was dizzying, confusing, a flood of voices, some kind, some cruel. She went downstairs and found her parents already at the table, coffee mugs in front of them, a local newspaper spread open between them. Her picture was on the front page, a still frame from the video, where she stood crying beside her crushed stand. The headline bold, "Texas Girls Lemonade Arrest Sparks Outrage." Gina looked tired. "They called 4 times already," she said. "Reporters, talk shows, even one from Los Angeles. They want interviews." Chuck didn't look up from his coffee. "We're not giving any." Gina frowned. "You sure? If we tell people what happened..." "They've already seen what happened," he said flatly. "We don't need to feed the noise." Dana sat down across from him. "Are they mad at you?" she asked. He finally met her eyes. "Some of them are," he said simply. "People who don't like being reminded that power doesn't make them right." She hesitated. "That man, the sergeant, he said he'd make sure we paid a fine. He said he'd make it official." "He'll try," Chuck said, "but he's already lost more than he knows." The phone rang again. Gina sighed and ignored it. The room felt too small, filled with too much air, too much tension. Finally, Dana said quietly, "Dad, I don't want to be on the news. I just wanted to sell lemonade." Chuck leaned forward, his voice softening. "I know, and that's exactly what makes you strong. You didn't do this for attention. You did it because you wanted to earn something with your own 2 hands. That's what they couldn't stand." The day wore on, and with it came the ripple effects. The sheriff's department released a short statement claiming that the officers were acting within protocol, but that an internal review was underway. It only made things worse. More people watched the video, more voices joined the outrage, and by afternoon, the small town of Red Oaks was crawling with reporters. Chuck refused to speak to them. He spent most of the day outside, repairing the fence near the barn, his movements slow and precise. Dana stayed close to him, helping where she could, though she mostly watched. At one point, a black SUV rolled past slowly, the windows tinted, the same kind the officers had driven the day before. She tensed instinctively, but Chuck didn't even glance up. "Don't look at them," he said. "They want you scared. Don't give them that." That night, after dinner, they sat together on the porch. The crickets had started their evening chorus, and the stars were beginning to pierce through the indigo sky. Dana sipped from a glass of lemonade, freshly made, though she couldn't bring herself to smile the way she had before. "Dad," she said after a while, "are you going to get in trouble for what you did?" Chuck took a slow breath. "Maybe," he said. "There'll be talk, reports, maybe even charges." She turned to him, her eyes wide. "But you didn't do anything wrong." He looked out at the dark fields, his expression unreadable. "That doesn't always matter." "Then why did you do it?" He looked at her then, and for a moment, the years of discipline and composure softened. "Because you're my daughter," he said simply. "Because you were afraid, and I won't ever let fear have the last word in this house." She leaned her head against his arm. "I wish people were like you." He smiled faintly. "The world doesn't need more people like me," he said. "It needs more people like you. People who still believe it can be good." The night deepened. A truck passed on the distant road, its headlights sweeping briefly across the field. Dana's eyelids grew heavy, the exhaustion of the past 2 days finally catching up to her. Gina appeared at the door, a blanket draped over her arm. "Come on, sweetheart," she said softly. "Bedtime." Dana stood, hesitated, and turned back to her father. Will it ever be normal again? Chuck looked up at the stars, their cold light glinting in his eyes. No, he said finally, but maybe it'll be better. The next morning brought more news. The sheriff's department had suspended Sergeant Kelly pending investigation. The younger officer, Muir, had resigned. Statements flooded in from across the country, politicians, celebrities, even police officers condemning the incident. Donna's story had become a symbol overnight, but with the attention came new problems. Someone spray-painted "Justice for Dana" on the wall of the local station. Others called for Chuck's arrest, claiming he had assaulted officers. When the mail arrived, Gina brought in a small stack of letters, some supportive, others hateful. "You can't win with the internet," she muttered. "It loves you one minute and tears you apart the next." Chuck read one letter silently, his expression calm. It was from a retired sheriff in Arizona, handwritten in neat cursive. "You did what most of us wish we could still do," it said. "You reminded people what the badge is supposed to stand for." He folded it neatly and tucked it into his pocket. "Some people still get it," he said. That afternoon, a lawyer arrived, a calm, middle-aged man named Marcus Riley, a family friend from years ago. "You've got a case," he said after hearing the story. "The department overstepped, and the whole country saw it. You could sue, file for damages, make this public." Chuck shook his head. "We don't want money." "Then what do you want?" "Accountability," he said simply, "and peace for my daughter." Marcus studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Sometimes peace starts with truth." He promised to look into the matter, to gather evidence and file the appropriate complaints. When he left, the air around the house felt a little lighter, as if something had shifted. But the unease still lingered beneath the surface, a shadow of what had happened, a reminder that not all battles end when the crowd disperses. That night, before bed, Dana stood by her window. The stars outside were the same as always, bright and eternal. But the world beneath them had changed. She traced a finger along the faint red mark on her wrist, now barely visible. "Dad?" she called softly. He appeared at her doorway. "Yeah? Are we really going to fight them?" Chuck leaned against the frame. "We're not fighting them," he said. "We're standing up for what's right. There's a difference." She nodded slowly. "You're not scared?" He smiled faintly. "Of course I'm scared. But courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about choosing what matters more." She thought about that for a moment, then whispered, "I want to be like you when I grow up." He chuckled quietly, stepping into the room and kissing the top of her head. "You already are," he said. "You just don't know it yet." When she finally fell asleep, the house was quiet again. Outside, the broken stand still sat near the road, the sign half buried in dust. But in the morning, Chuck would fix it. And when the time came, Dana would open it again. Not because she wanted money this time, but because she wanted to prove that the world couldn't take away her light. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both knew that the real fight, the one for truth, for dignity, for justice, was only just beginning. The next week arrived heavy with tension, the kind that crawled beneath the surface of every ordinary day. From the outside, the Norris home looked peaceful as always. The field stretched wide and golden. The porch creaked softly under the morning wind. The horses grazed lazily in the distance. But inside, the air carried something sharper, something unsaid. The video had long since gone viral. It wasn't just local news anymore. It was national. Talk shows debated it, headlines twisted it, and strangers on the internet built their own versions of the truth. For Dana, every ring of the phone felt like a reminder that her small lemonade stand had turned into something much bigger than she ever intended. She couldn't step outside without feeling the invisible eyes of the world on her. A delivery truck passing by would slow just a little too long. A stranger's car would park by the edge of the property. Someone would stop to take a picture of their mailbox. What had once been a quiet, safe piece of Texas land had become a stage, and Dana was at the center of it. That morning, she sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter in her hands. It bore the seal of the Red Oaks County Administration Office. Her name was printed neatly across the top. The words blurred together the more she stared at them. Phrases like noncompliance, unauthorized sale of perishable goods, potential fine. She couldn't even read the rest. Her stomach turned as she dropped the paper onto the table. Her mother took it gently, scanning it quickly. "They can't be serious," Gina said, her voice tight. They're finding a child? Chuck was silent at first. He sat across from them, a mug of coffee untouched beside him. His face was calm, but his eyes had the quiet fire that always came before a storm. He picked up the letter, reading it all the way through before folding it neatly. They're trying to save Faith, he said. They embarrassed themselves in front of the whole country. Now they want to look like they're just doing their job. But it's wrong, Dana said. I didn't do anything. I know, Chuck said, looking at her. That's why they're doing it. Because people who are wrong need to convince themselves they're right. Gina sighed and rubbed her temples. We should call Marcus, she said. He'll know what to do. Chuck nodded slowly, but his gaze stayed fixed on his daughter. Don't let them make you feel small, Dana. They're counting on that. Later that afternoon, Marcus arrived again, this time with a folder under his arm and a look that was equal parts concern and determination. They're escalating, he said as soon as he stepped into the kitchen. The department filed an official complaint, saying you interfered with an arrest. They want to push charges. Gina's breath caught. You're kidding. I wish I was, Marcus said, setting the folder down. They're claiming you used excessive force against law enforcement officers. The video clearly shows otherwise, but they're trying to control the narrative. Chuck didn't move, his hands resting flat on the table. They're protecting one of their own, he said. Exactly. Kelly's been on the force for 20 years. He's got friends in the department, maybe even in the city council. They're making this political now. Dana stood quietly near the doorway, listening, her heart pounding. They can't do that, she said softly. Everyone saw what really happened. Marcus gave her a small, sympathetic smile. The truth doesn't always matter right away, sweetheart. Sometimes people have to fight to make it matter. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of reporters, legal documents, and public pressure. Supporters sent letters and donations. People drove from nearby towns to leave flowers and handmade signs by the gate. Justice for Dana. Let kids be kids. Stand strong, Norris family. But not all the attention was kind. One morning, Gina found an envelope taped to their mailbox. Inside, a single piece of paper with the words, "Go back to Hollywood, tough guy." She tore it in half before Dana could see it, but Chuck already knew. They're scared, he said when she told him later. Scared people say stupid things. Meanwhile, the police department doubled down. A press conference was held at City Hall, where the sheriff himself spoke to the cameras, his face carefully rehearsed into sympathy. While we regret that a young girl was frightened, he said, our officers were simply enforcing local ordinances. Unfortunately, Mr. Norris chose to escalate the situation instead of allowing law enforcement to do their jobs. By evening, the clip was everywhere. Dana saw her father's name trending online alongside phrases like violent response and celebrity privilege. She sat on the couch scrolling through the comments until her vision blurred. They're lying, she said under her breath. They're making you sound like some kind of criminal. Chuck sat beside her, calm as stone. Let them talk, he said. The truth doesn't need defending, it just needs patience. But even patience was tested. 2 days later, an officer delivered another envelope to their home. It contained a summons. A hearing had been scheduled, an official review before the county board. Marcus promised he'd be there, that the evidence was on their side, that they'd expose the truth. But for Dana, every step closer to that day felt heavier. She couldn't go online without seeing her own face. She couldn't go to the store without whispers. Even at night, when the house was quiet, she heard the echo of that man's voice. Hands behind your back. One night she found her father sitting alone on the porch. The sky was dark and wide, filled with stars. He was cleaning an old pocket knife, the blade catching faint reflections from the moonlight. You can't sleep either? He asked without looking up. She shook her head. I keep thinking about it, about him, the way he looked at me. Chuck nodded slowly. People like that build their power on fear. They think if they scare you enough, you'll stop believing in yourself. Did they ever scare you? She asked. He paused, his hand stilling. Once, he said. A long time ago. I was young and I thought being tough meant fighting every battle that came my way. Then I learned the hard way that some fights aren't about fists. They're about not giving up who you are. Donna looked at him, the words sinking in. What if they win, Dad? He finally looked at her, his eyes steady. Then we make sure it's only this round they win, not the story. The hearing came the following week. The boardroom was packed reporters, officers, townspeople. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and cold. At one end of the long wooden table sat the county officials. At the other, Chuck, Gina, Dana, and Marcus. The air hummed with the tension of a public spectacle disguised as procedure. The sheriff began by reading the charges, his voice flat and deliberate. Mr. Norris is accused of obstructing an officer, interfering with the execution of lawful duty, and use of excessive force during an official police action. Marcus stood calmly. The video evidence shows no excessive force, only a father protecting his child from unlawful restraint. One of the board members adjusted his glasses. That remains to be determined. The screen behind them flickered to life, showing the video from that day, the same clip that had been watched millions of times online. The board watched in silence as the events played out. The officers confronting Dana, knocking over her stand. The moment Kelly grabbed her wrist, the look of panic on her face. When Chuck appeared on screen, the room shifted. You could feel it, the recognition of something primal, human, the movement, the precision, the control. No rage, no recklessness. Just a man stopping injustice with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. When the video ended, the room was quiet. Even the sheriff looked uneasy. Marcus spoke again. That, he said, is what restraint looks like. That's what honor looks like. What we saw from Sergeant Kelly, on the other hand, is abuse of power. A murmur rippled through the audience. One of the officials cleared his throat. Mr. Norris, do you have anything to say for yourself? Chuck stood, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. I didn't plan what happened that day, he said. I didn't wake up thinking I'd have to step between a man with a badge and my daughter. But when someone forgets that their badge is supposed to protect, not control, that's when ordinary people have to remember what courage is. His words hung in the air, heavy and unbroken. I didn't fight your officers, he continued. I stopped them from hurting a child. If that's a crime, then we've all forgotten what justice means. There was a long silence. Then the board members exchanged glances. The hearing recessed for deliberation. Dana sat gripping her mother's hand. The room buzzed with whispers, the low hum of speculation. When the board returned, the decision came quietly. The department will conduct further internal review, the chairman said. Mr. Norris, you will not face charges at this time. A sigh of relief rippled through the room. Dana exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks, but Chuck didn't smile. He just nodded once. Calm, steady, composed. He knew it wasn't over, not yet. Outside, reporters swarmed them, shouting questions. Marcus shielded them as best he could, ushering them toward the car. Dana heard fragments. Hero or vigilante? Will you sue the county? Do you regret your actions? But her father never answered. He opened the car door for her, and she climbed in silently. As they drove away, the courthouse growing smaller in the rearview mirror, Dana looked out at the horizon. The sky was streaked with gold and violet, the light fading behind the hills. So what happens now? She asked. Chuck's eyes stayed on the road. Now, he said, we make sure the truth keeps shining, even when they try to cover it. Gina looked back at her daughter and smiled faintly. And maybe one day we'll get to build that stand again. Dana turned toward the window, watching the fields roll by, her reflection faint against the glass. She wasn't sure if she wanted to build another stand, but she knew one thing. If she ever did, she wouldn't be afraid. Not anymore. The world had seen her cry. It had seen her father fight. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the scars and the noise and the fear, she felt something small but unbreakable take root. A quiet kind of strength that no one could find, no one could handcuff, and no one could destroy. The fight wasn't over, but neither was she. The courthouse in Red Oaks had never seen so many cameras. On the morning of the hearing, the square outside was packed with people, some holding homemade signs, others clutching coffee cups, their faces lit with that mix of curiosity and outrage that only comes when the whole country decides to care. News vans lined the street, their antennas pointed skyward, and reporters rehearsed their lines in front of the marble steps, each one determined to frame the day in their own way. To some, it was a story about power and corruption. To others, about a man who had dared to defy the law. But for Dana, sitting in the back seat of the car as they pulled up, it was something else entirely. It was about fear, the kind that still tightened her throat whenever she thought about plastic ties around her wrists. Gina reached back and squeezed her daughter's hand. "You don't have to go inside if you don't want to," she said gently, but Dana shook her head. "I want to be there." Chuck said nothing. His face was calm, unreadable, the same expression he'd worn the day everything fell apart. He parked the truck in the small lot behind the courthouse, stepped out, and for a moment simply looked at the building. It was tall but not grand, its white paint faded and chipped in places, its flag fluttering half-heartedly in the humid wind. Inside, Justice was supposed to live, but today he wasn't sure if Justice still remembered this place. Marcus Riley met them at the entrance, papers tucked under his arm, his tie already loosened from the heat. "They're making this bigger than it should be," he said quietly as they walked. "The department wants to prove they weren't in the wrong. They've brought in their own attorney, a city lawyer. It's going to be ugly." Chuck's voice was steady. Truth usually is. They passed through the metal detectors, the faint beeping swallowed by the murmur of the crowd. Reporters shouted questions as they walked by. "Mr. Norris, do you regret your actions? Do you think you went too far? What lesson do you want to send to the public?" But Chuck didn't even glance at them. He placed his hand lightly on Dana's shoulder, guiding her toward the double doors at the end of the hallway. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and dust. Rows of benches stretched out behind the tables, already filled with townspeople and journalists. The air buzzed with low whispers, the creak of floorboards, the scratch of pens. At the front, the county judge, an older man with silver hair and weary eyes, adjusted his glasses and looked over the crowd. His gavel struck once, the sharp sound cutting through the noise. "Court is now in session." The prosecution began with practiced precision. The county attorney, a man named Philip Reynolds, stood in his dark suit, his voice confident and clipped. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not about a child's lemonade stand. It is about respect for law and order. It is about the limits of civilian interference in police procedure. We will show that Sergeant Kelly and Officer Muir were simply carrying out their duties and that Mr. Norris, through his actions, obstructed a lawful investigation and endangered public servants." He gestured toward the two officers sitting at the front. Muir avoided Chuck's gaze, his face pale and drawn. Kelly, however, sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, his eyes full of quiet defiance. When it was Marcus's turn, he stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor," he said, "this case is not about law and order. It is about the abuse of it. It is about a man who saw his daughter, a 13-year-old girl, being restrained and humiliated by the very people sworn to protect her, and he acted not out of violence, but out of love. The video speaks for itself." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Marcus turned toward the jury and began to play the footage. The room fell silent as the screen flickered to life. The shaky recording showed Dana's stand, her bright smile, the table full of lemonade. Then the patrol car rolled up. The air in the courtroom seemed to tighten as Kelly's voice filled the speakers, barking orders, his words sharp and cold. The moment the glass pitcher shattered, someone in the back gasped. Dana looked down, gripping her mother's hand so tightly her knuckles whitened. When the image shifted to show Chuck stepping from his truck, the murmurs rose. The fight, the one the internet had dissected frame by frame, played out again, but this time in the stillness of a courtroom. Every movement was deliberate. Every second showed restraint, precision, control. When it ended, Marcus turned back to the judge. "That, Your Honor, is not an assault. That's a father preventing one." Reynolds stood immediately. "Objection? The defense is editorializing." "Sustained," the judge said, though his tone carried less conviction than formality. The prosecution called Kelly to the stand first. He walked stiffly, straightening his uniform as if it were armor. "Sergeant," Reynolds began, "can you describe what happened that afternoon?" Kelly cleared his throat. We received a call about unauthorized sales on a residential property. When we arrived, we found the subject, a young girl operating without a permit. We attempted to explain the regulations, but she became uncooperative. Murmurs rippled through the room. Reynolds continued. And at what point did the defendant, Mr. Norris, become involved? Kelly's mouth tightened. He approached aggressively, ignored our commands to step back. Then he struck me and disarmed both myself and my partner. Marcus rose. Permission to cross, Your Honor. Granted. He walked to the center of the room, his voice calm but edged with steel. Sergeant, you said the girl became uncooperative. Is that what you call crying? Kelly shifted in his seat. She refused to comply. With what? Selling lemonade? Selling without a license. Marcus stepped closer. So you're saying you saw a 13-year-old selling drinks in front of her own home, and you decided the appropriate response was to destroy her stand, confiscate her money, and tie her hands? Kelly's jaw clenched. Procedure exists for a reason. Marcus turned to the jury. Yes, he said softly. And when people forget what procedure is for to serve, not to dominate, that's when justice dies. The prosecutor objected again, but the damage was done. Kelly's words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Next came Muir. His hands shook slightly as he took the stand. He looked at Dana before lowering his eyes. Reynolds' questions were short, careful. Officer, can you confirm your partner's account? Muir hesitated. Mostly. He swallowed hard. I didn't agree with everything that happened. Reynolds frowned. But you didn't intervene. No, sir. Why not? Because he was my superior. The room was silent. Marcus didn't even need to cross-examine. The hesitation said enough. When it was finally time for the defense to present their witnesses, Gina was called first. She spoke with calm precision, her voice steady but full of quiet pain. My daughter wanted to earn money for a camera, she said. That's all. She made lemonade herself. We built that stand together. It was supposed to be a lesson in hard work, not humiliation. When Marcus called Dana next, the room seemed to collectively hold its breath. She walked slowly to the stand, her small frame dwarfed by the witness chair. Marcus gave her a reassuring nod. Dana, he said gently, can you tell us what happened that day? She took a deep breath. I was selling lemonade, she said softly. People were nice. They said I made the best in town. Then the police came. I thought they were going to buy some, but they weren't smiling. Her voice wavered. They asked me for a permit. I didn't know I needed one. When I tried to call my mom, one of them took my phone. Then he broke my pitcher, and he told me to put my hands behind my back. Her words echoed in the stillness. The jurors watched her, faces unreadable, but eyes softening. Did you resist? Marcus asked. No, I just cried. What happened next? She looked at her father. He came. Her voice trembled, but she didn't cry. And I wasn't scared anymore. Marcus smiled gently. Thank you, Dana. When she stepped down, even the judge looked moved. Finally, it was Chuck's turn. He stood straight as he took the oath, his presence commanding without effort. Marcus began, Mr. Norris, can you tell the court why you intervened that day? Chuck's eyes met the jury's. Because I saw my daughter being hurt. I saw the look on her face. I didn't care about cameras or rules. I cared about right and wrong. Those men weren't upholding the law. They were using it to intimidate a child. Reynolds pounced. Mr. Norris, are you saying you think you're above the law? No, Chuck said calmly. I'm saying the law is supposed to protect people, not punish them for being human. Do you regret what you did? He paused. I regret that it was necessary. The room was silent again. The judge leaned back in his chair, studying him. There was something in the way Chuck spoke, measured, grounded, that made every word feel like it belonged in the air, permanent and irrefutable. By the time closing statements came, the energy in the courtroom had shifted. Reynolds repeated the language of statutes and codes, but it sounded hollow. Marcus spoke quietly, almost tenderly. This isn't about one family, he said. It's about remembering what justice is supposed to look like. If a little girl selling lemonade can be treated like a criminal, then maybe the system we trust needs to be reminded of its own heart. When the jury left to deliberate, time seemed to stretch. Dana sat between her parents, her small hand gripping her father's. No one spoke. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, promising rain. An hour later, the door opened. The jurors filed back in, solemn and still. The foreman stood, a folded paper in his hand. The judge nodded. "Have you reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The paper was passed forward. The judge unfolded it, scanning the words, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. "In the matter of the state versus Charles Norris, we find the defendant not guilty on all counts." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, like a wave breaking, applause erupted. The sound filled the room, raw and human. Reporters shouted, people stood, and Dana threw her arms around her father. Gina's tears came silently, her hand pressed to her mouth. Chuck simply closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. When he opened them, he looked at his daughter, her face bright with relief. "You see?" he said quietly. "Truth always finds its way." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping softly against the courthouse steps. The storm had come, but for the first time in weeks, it didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like cleansing. It felt like renewal. The fight that had started with a lemonade stand had ended in a courtroom, but the echo of it would last far beyond that day, because somewhere in that room, amid the noise and the applause, people remembered something they'd forgotten, that justice wasn't about authority. It was about humanity. And for Dana, as she walked beside her father through the rain, she realized she would never again think of lemonade as just a drink. It had become something much bigger, a symbol of standing tall, of speaking softly but firmly, of believing in what's right even when the world calls you wrong. Her small hand found her father's again, and together they stepped out into the rain, the crowd parting for them as they passed. The storm above them rumbled, but their path felt clear. The truth had spoken, and for the first time in a long while, it had been heard. The rain that began outside the courthouse that day didn't last long, but something about it lingered in the air for days afterward. The skies over Red Oaks seemed softer, clearer, as though the clouds themselves had finally exhaled. The heat that had once burned the town dry now felt gentler, and for the first time in weeks, the Norris family could walk outside without feeling the weight of invisible eyes on them. Still, life didn't simply snap back into place. The wounds of humiliation, the weeks of tension, the endless chatter of news outlets and strangers, those things didn't disappear overnight. They lingered like the faint scent of citrus in an empty glass, reminders of what had been lost and what had been won. Donna sat on the porch one morning, her chin resting on her knees. The field stretched endlessly before her, green and gold under the late summer sun. From inside, she could hear her parents talking in quiet tones. The courthouse victory had brought closure, but it had also drawn a line in their lives, before and after. Chuck had received dozens of calls since the verdict, invitations from talk shows, offers for interviews, even requests from politicians who wanted to use his story. He had turned them all down. "We're not a headline," he told Marcus over the phone. "We're a family." But for Dana, it wasn't just about what people said or thought. It was about reclaiming the part of herself that had been taken that day. The joy of doing something simple, something kind, without fear. She had thought about her lemonade stand almost every night. The sound of the glass pitcher cracking still haunted her dreams, but so did the laughter of her first customers, the sweet satisfaction of earning her own money, and the pride on her mother's face. Somewhere in that mix of memories was something pure, something worth saving. She stood brushing dust from her jeans and walked toward the shed where the old pieces of her stand had been stored. The wooden boards were still splintered from where they'd fallen, but the bright yellow paint she and her mom had brushed on that first day was still visible. Her fingers traced over the faded letters. Fresh Lemonade 1, now chipped but not forgotten. She could almost hear her mother's voice again, soft and encouraging, telling her to make the sign as bright as her smile. The door creaked open behind her. Chuck stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one warm milk instead of coffee, the way she liked it. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep," she replied. He looked down at the broken boards. Thinking about rebuilding it? She hesitated. I don't know. Maybe. But I don't want people to think we're doing it for attention. He smiled faintly. The people who matter won't think that. She glanced up at him. Would you help me? Always. By noon, the two of them were out in the yard with a pile of lumber, a few nails, and the same small hammer Dana had used when she built it the first time. Gina watched from the porch, her expression a mix of pride and worry. She had suggested they wait, that maybe it was too soon, but Chuck and Dana had already decided. This wasn't about proving a point. It was about taking back what had been theirs. As they worked, neighbors began to appear. First came the jogger with the golden retriever, carrying a bag of lemons and smiling shyly as he placed them on the table. Then Mrs. Kennedy came hobbling down the road, her walker scraping the gravel, a small jar of sugar in her hand. For the grand reopening, she said with a wink. Before long, others joined. Mr. Patel from the corner store brought a bag of ice, saying he'd seen something online about the new stand. A group of teenagers stopped by, offering to paint a new sign. Even the local pastor came, sleeves rolled up, saying, if a little lemonade can teach this town something about grace, then count me in. By the time the stand was rebuilt, the sun had begun to dip toward the horizon, spilling long streaks of light across the road. The new sign read, Justice Lemonade, one made with courage. Dana stood back and looked at it, her hands on her hips. It's perfect, she said softly. Chuck wiped his hands on a rag. Looks like you're back in business. Not just me, she said smiling. Us. The next morning, the smell of lemons filled the kitchen once again. Dana squeezed each one carefully, the way her mom had taught her, counting under her breath as she mixed the sugar and water. The sound of the knife slicing through the fruit was sharp and satisfying. How many do you think will sell today? She asked. As many as you want, Gina replied, placing a sprig of mint on top of the pitcher. But remember this time, it's not about the money. Dana nodded. It's about making things right. They carried the pitcher outside together. The stand stood proud under the morning light, its sign catching the soft breeze. Cars slowed as they passed, some honking, others stopping. A few reporters had tried to come by again, but Chuck had politely turned them away. Today wasn't for cameras. It was for the people who had believed in them, who had stood up for a girl's right to sell lemonade without fear. The first customers were a young couple who'd driven from 2 towns over. We saw your story, the woman said, smiling. We wanted to be part of it. They paid for 2 cups but didn't take any change. Keep the rest, the man said, for the next stand you build. Dana beamed. Thank you. Throughout the day, more people came. Families, kids, even a few police officers from neighboring districts. One of them, a woman in uniform, approached with hesitation. I don't work for Red Oaks PD, she said quickly as if she needed to clarify it. I just wanted to tell you, what happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone. You were brave. Dana looked at her father. He nodded slightly. She handed the officer a cup and said, Thank you for saying that. By midday, the stand was surrounded. A line formed down the sidewalk, people chatting, laughing, and taking pictures, not for fame, but because it felt like history, small and human, unfolding right there on a Texas road. The clink of coins in the jar became a kind of rhythm, steady and hopeful. Every pour of lemonade felt like rewriting a piece of the story. At one point, Chuck stepped aside, letting Dana run the stand on her own. He leaned against the fence, watching as she worked with the same quiet focus he'd seen the first day she'd built it. She wasn't the same little girl anymore, though. There was something different in the way she carried herself now, a quiet strength that had been forged through tears, fear, and truth. Gina joined him, folding her arms. You know, she said softly, I didn't think she'd want to do this again. He nodded. Neither did I. She's tougher than both of us combined, Gina said, smiling faintly. Yeah, Chuck said. She is. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Dana wiped sweat from her forehead and looked up to see a familiar car slowing near the edge of the street. For a second, her chest tightened, the white SUV. But this time, the driver's window rolled down to reveal a different officer, a young man with kind eyes. He smiled and gave a small wave before driving off. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing. Not every badge was the same. She was learning that now. When the last customer left, the family sat on the porch, the jar full again, the air thick with the smell of lemons and fresh grass. The world felt bigger somehow, wider, fairer. Dana sat cross-legged on the steps, sipping a cup of her own lemonade. The cicadas had begun their song, and the evening light bathed everything in gold. She looked up at her father. "Dad? Yeah? Do you think people will remember all this?" He thought for a moment, then smiled. "Some will, most won't. But that's not what matters." "Then what does?" "That you remember who you are," he said, "and that you don't let anyone make you forget it." She nodded slowly, taking another sip. "I think I understand now." "Understand what?" Gina asked gently. "That strength isn't about fighting," Dana said. "It's about standing your ground even when people try to make you fall." Chuck smiled proudly. "That's a lesson most adults never learn." The sun dipped below the trees and the first stars appeared. Dana leaned against her father's arm, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the calm strength that had carried them through everything. The porch light flickered on, casting a warm glow around them. The sign out front swayed gently in the breeze, its words illuminated in the soft light. "Justice Lemonade, made with courage." Somewhere down the road, the faint hum of another car drifted by, but Dana barely noticed. The world was finally quiet again. For the first time since that terrible day, she felt at peace, not because everything was perfect, but because she knew they had faced the storm and stayed true to themselves. Chuck raised his glass toward her. "To new beginnings," he said. She smiled and clinked hers against his. "And to lemonade," she added. They laughed softly, the sound blending with the chorus of the night. When darkness finally settled over Red Oaks, the Norris house stood like a small island of light amid the quiet fields. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the faint scent of lemons across the open air. And though no one would ever truly understand what that little stand had meant, not the cameras, not the reporters, not even the crowd that had cheered outside the courthouse, Chuck, Gina, and Dana did. For them, it wasn't about headlines or victories. It was about dignity. It was about knowing that even in a world where power could be cruel, courage could still be gentle. And as the stars shimmered above, Dana whispered to herself before drifting to sleep, "Justice tastes like lemonade." The night held the words close, letting them settle softly over the fields, a quiet promise that some truths, once spoken, never fade. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Hit subscribe, share it with someone who needs to see it, and keep watching for more true stories that will keep you thinking long after the screen fades to black.